Purpose Highway is a space for discussions that drive connections toward people's highest purpose to build a better self and a better world. Join me for season 1, where I start to uncover stories of entrepreneurs and thinkers that are making an impact. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and enjoy today's episode. Welcome, guest. It's another episode of Scott Mason's Purpose Highway, and we have with us today an extraordinary guest, the one and only Susan Ganz. She is the CEO of Ganz Strategic Solutions, which provides leaders with assistance regarding the leading of major strategic initiatives, including things like growth, business development, and change. She is a graduate of Tufts University and of the Wharton Business School, so obviously she's got a brain on her head. And she was in the financial services industry for many years, which is pretty amazing considering she cannot be a day over 21 and managed to accomplish all of this. And she is with us here today. Susan, it is such a joy to have you. Thank you for making it.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here, and I wish I could take you everywhere I go with that introduction.
Well, I love being your number one cheerleader because you, of all people, deserve it.
Thank you.
You know, Susan, we had a great pre-interview and discussion before we started the taping today. And during that discussion, we chatted about a lot of your thinking around leadership, resilience, and around the journey that life has become. And one of the things that I really admire about you, and it is embedded in really every message that I have seen you give, is the idea that life is a series of journeys. And when one adventure ends, you step off that boat and then you move on to the next one. And you've really lived that in a way that I feel is more extraordinary than most people can even imagine. Talk to me a little bit about what you hear when you hear me say those words, life is a journey, when one ends, another begins, and how that applies to your life and to your story, because that also helps explain to our listeners and the people watching this who you are.
Thank you for that question. So really, my journey, as you said, is a series of journeys. And I think I heard once that at least in the Jewish religion, there's something about there's like 19 journeys that somebody has in their
Wow.
life. So I've lost track of how many journeys I have. But let's start this story from a professional standpoint. And my undergraduate degree at Tufts was in clinical psychology. And I thought initially that I was going to get my PhD. But when I had an internship in the field in my senior year, I was really awakened to some things that struck me about the whole industry. And that was, I worked in a locked psychiatric unit of a hospital. And I saw that there was tremendous amount of turnover and burnout. In the 9 months that I was there, 50% of the staff turned over.
Whoa.
And that really took me by surprise as a young 20-something.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to get burned out. And I didn't want to lose my personality. And I didn't want to lose my love of people. And something else that struck me was that insurance companies really dictated care. So you would have patients who would be working on deep-seated psychological issues for 4 to 6 weeks. And then they would be told that they needed to be discharged. And when they were discharged, they would be discharged to an environment that, let's say, wasn't necessarily supportive of their change. And then we would see this revolving door of patients that insurance companies would pay for. And it always struck me that why couldn't we just get at the root cause? Because if we got at the root cause, wouldn't that be better? So that's something that I still see today in the industry. So I decided that I really loved people and analysis, and I married the two and decided to go into commercial lending and apply my psychology to a business setting. And the bank that I worked for at the time was so embracing of that background. And in fact, when I told one of my colleagues what I had studied undergrad, he said to me, "We could really use a psychology major around here."
Wow.
And what I found, why he said that, was because in working with CEOs and CFOs, it gets lonely at the top and you become a sounding board. You're a business psychologist of sorts, because they're not just talking to you about their financial challenges. They're talking to you about what's going on strategically, what's going on from a marketing perspective, what's happening in their operations. And I realized that I could only impact them from their financial needs. And that's why I went back to school to get my MBA, to have broader conversations and to transition to consulting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that was my first journey.
What led to then the next journey, and how exactly did that happen, and how did it feel when you were making that first big transition in your life?
So it was a little daunting to go to business school. Something I wanted, something I sought, but I went to business school at a time when we were in the midst of a recession. I had several people say to me, "Susan, why do you want to get to business school now? There's a recession." I said, "Well, the recession's not going to last forever, so
Mm-hmm.
I could see things turning around. And this is something I'm really committed to doing." So I was all in, committed to doing. And I also knew at some point I wanted to become an entrepreneur. I didn't know what the content of that was. So I worked at the Small Business Development Center to get my feet wet into consulting. And that was a fantastic experience because I could go from the classroom to applying what I learned to these entrepreneurs. And interestingly enough, I found that a lot of their issues of their business, if they told me, "Hey, revenues are down, I think it's marketing, or I think we're offering too many product lines," it wasn't the issue at all. In digging deeper, often the issues had to do with communication.
Interesting. And in what respect? And what do you mean by that exactly? Their communication with their staff, their communication with vendors, their communication to the outside world? And were there any internal blocks? Or do you feel like that was just a lack of a certain skill set, or was it a combination of both?
So what happened in the case of, I'll give you a couple of examples. So in the case of working with this design build firm, he had told me all the things that were wrong with the business, and he was convinced that it had to do with marketing.
Mm.
Sales were down, clients were unhappy, his staff was unhappy. And so in doing a diagnostic, if you will, of really understanding all the touch points in the business and what was happening, the reason why clients weren't paying was because the owner was a headstrong ex-military person, and he had a vision for how that remodeling project would go, and the clients would have a different vision. So when the visions
Oops.
didn't meet, the clients didn't pay.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one communication issue. And another communication issue had to do with the fact that the CEO also was very hands-on, very controlling. So he would sometimes overstep his bounds and overstepping the super on the job. And there were mixed messages coming about as a result. So in providing solutions there, it had to do with defining some processes and controls so that the CEO could see what was happening and he didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to overstep. So some simple spreadsheets and role definitions need to be put in place so people knew what were they responsible for. And then the final piece that of solutioning that I gave was to the CEO. And I was half his age at the time that I gave this advice. And I said to him, "If you remember nothing else from this conversation, please stop and listen before you act and speak."
Wow. And to someone then who presumably was not used to stopping and listening before he acted and spoke, how did that go over?
I think he was stunned. I think I was even shocked that it came out of my mouth. But I felt that he needed to hear it. And I know he respected me afterwards because we got together a couple of times thereafter and kept in touch for a bit afterwards. Because he needed to hear it. I felt very strongly that there's my psychology coming out that active listening is so powerful, to just stop and hear the other person. Sometimes we want to fill up the space by talking, but if you really stop and listen and acknowledge what the other person is saying, it goes so far in enhancing that relationship and enhancing your business.
It's interesting because I'm hearing parallel themes in the first story that you shared and the last story. And in both of those cases, as I'm hearing it, we have a situation where the CEO or one individual who is in a leadership role with regards to a project in particular had a vision or had an idea that they were moving towards, and they were seeking to control the relationship or the initiative, irrespective of what the other stakeholders in that conversation or in that project had. And one of the things that I see as a very interesting subtextual context or subtextual theme in what you're talking about is that your own journey has been defined by not necessarily seizing control, but accepting that certain events or certain things are out of your control and then adapting accordingly. Am I totally off base here, or is there anything in your journey that you feel that statement resonated to that maybe you haven't talked about yet, or you've spoken about so far, or do you even completely disagree with what I just said?
As I reflect on certain circumstances, yes, there have definitely been things that have been out of my control, particularly lately when you're talking about a pandemic.
Yeah.
But there's also things where opportunities were made available to me that I would say that I took control.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunity was presented, I evaluated it and decided. And I'm particularly thinking about that after business school, I had joined a company focused on corporate finance and strategy consulting. And I did that for 3 years and wanted to go deeper with the companies, always wanted to know how the post-merger process was going, or were there recommendations that I made, were they truly being implemented? How was that? And what's the next? From there, I got an opportunity to work full-time with one company, which is what I sought, but it was unexpected to me what that opportunity would be. And I got offered the opportunity to go work on Wall Street in the technology area. And I don't have formal training in technology. And I was asked to join the team to come up with a strategy, process, and tools to help one company on Wall Street with how it managed its technology vendors. And, I had to step, that was a risk, going from a revenue producing role to a support role. It was a risk in joining a team where people had technology expertise and I did not.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did was to I bartered with my teammates. I said, listen, I will gladly teach you financial and strategic analysis, because that was what I was brought in for, if you teach me technology. And they said, deal. So every day we had class. So we'd use a whiteboard and they would teach me technology terms and I would teach them how to analyze financial statements and what it meant to look at a company in the context of the economy and their industry and then compare them to their peers?
You know, one of the things that story points to is creativity when it comes to dealing with situations. So I will be honest, if that opportunity had come to me, I would have put both of my hands on my cheeks, screamed, and then went and, took a big dive under my desk and maybe never come out again. Instead, you dove right in and came up with a very interesting out of the box way to both create a sense of comfort between you and the client, as well as educate yourself and make yourself someone that was actually fluent in the language of the industry that you're speaking in. And the screaming and all of that on my end probably would have been because of the technological component, which is not only highly specific, but it's well known as extremely difficult to learn and not easy for people who are outside of that natural disposition to be able to master. Talk to me about what sort of processes you had or that you utilized under the circumstances to come up with a creative solution like that. And the reason why I ask that is one of the other things that you have consistently demonstrated throughout your career, and I'd love to hear, by the way, any stories you have that illustrate this, is resiliency. And I would argue that many people would agree that one of the keys to being able to be resilient in challenging circumstances, such as pandemics or economic meltdowns or other catastrophes, is the ability to be creative on the spot or to pull creativity out of ourselves. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So I'll share a couple of stories about that. So when I was working on Wall Street, and yes, I borrowed it in the education, I was also giving a huge initiative to brand and automate how that bank did their pitch books. And I was told when I got handed this project that it was global in nature and that it failed 8 times prior. So here I am, 0 software development experience, 0 project management experience, 0 business analyst experience. Go make this happen for a major bank on Wall Street.
Yeah, nothing intimidating pressure at all. Yeah, no pressure. Just chill out, pull out a pillow, curl up your feet, and just do it.
So I don't know where you went, Scott, but you're frozen.
Am I back?
You're back now.
Good.
Okay.
Am I frozen again?
No, you're good.
Okay.
So what I did was quickly use my psychology and said, why did this project fail? And from talking to stakeholders from around the world, I found out that they weren't involved in the process. And then I went to my manager and made the case for why it was very important to start the project with an official offsite to have key people from around the world in the room. So get the technologists in the room, the bankers in the room, the desktop publishing. So everybody who would have been impacted by this project together. And that was the key to the success. And yes, we got it right the 9th time, and we wound up saving the company $12 million a year.
Wow. That's an amazing story. And that is being creative. I mean, that's thinking about it. It sounds like from a process perspective in a totally different way than the other 8 people had ever thought about it. Talk to me about your other story then. I want to hear that too.
So fast forward to being in a pandemic, and I've had recently launched my consulting firm earlier this year. My business came to a halt. So all the consulting and coaching work that I had going on stopped completely. And I had a choice to make. I could have decided to go hide in bed every day and ignore what was happening.
Yeah.
Or I could show up and do something. And I started to think about how I could be a first responder. So yes, I'm not a medical professional. I am not a police officer or firefighter. what I am is a business person, and I knew that small, mid-sized businesses and nonprofits would need help. So I decided, as an inspiration from the newscasters on TV and from the late night talk show hosts, that we all had access to the same technology and that we were all working from home. And I was really inspired that if they could do it with, like, all you need is some technology software on your computer, and you're in business.
Yeah.
And so I channeled an inner dream to be a talk show host and launched a web show. And I decided to do a play on words because I really felt that people needed to take a rest, take a pause in the pandemic. And I named my show Resiliency and Empowerment Seminar today. I made the acronym work.
That is brilliant.
Thank you. And so I just started. I framed out what I wanted the show to be about. I framed out the questions. You were gracious enough to be one of my wonderful guests.
It was a blast.
Thank you. And I started doing the interviews, and now it's over 60 interviews later, and I'm still going. And people really seem to enjoy hearing the stories because I truly put the focus on the other person. So it's also using my listening skills to bring out the stories that people have to share.
Well, it also sounds like you are bringing in that project the concept of service as well, right? Well, I mean, how you framed your thinking around this was as a first responder, which is a service-oriented profession or group of professions. You're saying I'm focusing it on the other person. And you even embedded in your show's title a very specific message that's meant to provide comfort and strength to the listener. Talk to me a little bit about how you view service, and particularly in the light of, coming from someone with a financial services background, that may not necessarily be the first thing that people think of when they hear your profession. And I understand you have psychology in the background, so maybe that plays into it a little bit. But do you think that there has been a buildup in your career with regards to service, and how has the concept of service played out or not as you've moved forward, in addition to this excellent talk show that you have?
Thank you. So I think the service orientation started because I saw my parents being involved in the community. And at a very young age, I started volunteering. So I was a mentor in high school. And then I mentored in college, and I mentored post-college. And for a time, I didn't mentor after business school, and I worked that back into it, and I sought that out. And that's how I became involved in an organization called the Financial Women's Association. And just by raising my hand and saying, oh, I want to be a mentor, I got involved in that organization and later grew up to be president of that organization. But that wasn't the idea when I joined the organization. It was just simply giving back, and it's just a core value that I've had.
If you had one thing to say to someone who might be watching or listening to this show about resilience, whether they're listening to it during this pandemic or years from now when they may be facing personal crises of their own, or there may be other global or local challenges that people are facing, and they hear this and they think, well, Susan Ganz did this. How can I take something from her that would give me the strength, the creativity, and the versatility that she's had? What would that piece of advice, what would that thing that you would say to them be?
First, I would say breathe, because when you slow down your brain, you are able to access that creativity. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when people get stressed, right, their breath shortens and they tense up, like their muscles. So when you breathe, it forces you to slow down. So that's the first piece of it. And the second is thinking back to times when you have been resilient and you might have not even thought that you were being resilient. And it could be various circumstances. So, I draw from the strength that, my father died from stage 4 pancreatic cancer in 2001.
I'm so sorry.
And thank you.
Yeah.
And when you're in the cancer journey and supporting somebody going through that, it teaches you your perspective, at least my perspective changed in terms of what was important in life and what's not important. And being able to work through that. And I had a young child at the time, it was less than 1 when this was all happening. So I said to myself, I could get through that. I got through 9/11. I got through the recession in 08, 09. So just thinking about times where, there was adversity or challenges, and knowing that I could get through it, that there was this other side. Hurricane Sandy, there have been so many events that people have been full of strengths to get through. And it's reminding ourselves that we can do this, and also knowing that we're not alone. Like, there are other people who are going through this, and yes, they might have different tools and resources in going through it, but we're all faced with these circumstances, at least at the moment.
Susan, how can people find out more about you? How can they connect with you? And do you have anything going on in your life, any projects or any services that you want to share with folks?
Sure. So thank you for asking. So you can find me at GANZstrategicsolutions.com, and GANZ is GANZ, strategicsolutions.com. So within that, it's hello@GANZstrategicsolutions.com if you would like to send me a note. And I'm on LinkedIn as well under Susan Ganz of Ganz Strategic Solutions. And you can find my web show on my website under News and Insights, as well as my YouTube channel, Ganz Strategic Solutions. And I'd like to do something special for your listeners, Scott, and that is when you go to my website at hello, or send me an email directly at hello@GANZstrategicsolutions.com, you can get your own 20-minute discovery session. If you have a business question or challenge that you would like some support with, I am happy to do that at a complimentary basis, and mention Scott's show, The Purpose Highway.
Thank you. And that is very much appreciated. And you all cannot go wrong with Susan Ganz. She is incredible. Susan, it has been great taking a walk down the Purpose Highway with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Scott.
Checking out. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Join our community today at purposehighway.com and subscribe to get notified when new episodes go live. Scott Mason, checking out.